is open. Aaron.
In light of the first and the last presentation, I have a question. Let's say there's a theoretical country. Let's say it's Hungary, where have they crossed the line in which one day the people who have done this will be brought before a court of law for what they're doing now? So I'm just curious, because I haven't heard this being raised in the public discussions. Have we crossed that threshold? Yeah, why don't you come up? Yeah.
Maybe I'll add to this question so others can also participate in the answer. It's clearly that from international law point of view, Israel is violating the treaties that it signed. We know that one of the problems of international law is enforcement. And the question is exactly the question that is related to the other presentation, whether officials who refuse or citizens who refuse orders or laws on the basis that they are infringing international law should be accountable by Israeli law to their actions, or they can get an exemption. And this is not really resistance or disobedience on the law. It's an argument that since Israel is violating international law, we are not obliged to follow the Israeli illegal law.
There are so many levels to this question. I mean, I talked about the right to resist, but I said it remains unlawful by Israeli law. On the international level, the only way of bringing someone to justice is through the ICC. And that seems to me, Hungary or any country which overrides democracy, I do not think under the ICC that would be enough to bring them to trial. It depends on the acts they commit in order to enforce their undemocratic rule. So I think before such acts like putting people on trial for treason and imprisoning them or having them put to death, that would bring them within the purview of the International Criminal Court. But before that, merely undermining democracy or getting rid of democracy, I don't see falling under the Rome Statute. I wanted to add a question, since I'm already standing up here, which was to Adam, which I found very interesting. But I think that the discussion of Adam's official resistance was actually in democratic states to partial disobedience, to part of the regulation or the legislation or by the state. You see in Israel, as in Hungary and all the other countries that have gone over to being autocracies, that elected public officials become puppets of the state. They're elected they're put in office, they're appointed for their loyalty to the state. And so the idea of official resistance becomes marginal. It's like Farada, the guy, the book about the guy who went around in Nazi Germany putting Fallada. Yeah, Hans Fallada. I mean, it becomes marginal. I don't think it becomes a real possibility. I'd like you to respond to this. The more autocratic the state becomes, and in fact, what's on the table today, the law saying that the court cannot say what is unreasonable, is directed exactly to that we will appoint people who carry out our commands without question, without because they believe or they don't necessarily believe, they have been bought into the system. So that was my question on that. I don't know if I fully answered what you asked.
Whether this is actually a question more to see than Amnon and Adam.
Yeah.
Whether in Israeli law.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to leave it to you to look at that. I think Israeli law has lost its legitimacy already.
So just a brief reply, because I guess we're kind of running out of time, or we're over time. You're right, Francis, that the more totalitarian a regime is, the likelihood of resistance from inside the state might be more minimal, because the sanctions will be more severe, A, or B, because the people who are staffing the regime will be more identify more with the regime. But first of all, I think Israel is not there yet, right? So I don't think Israel, 10 years from now, I don't know, but Israel is not Hungary right now. It's not Poland right now. It might be in the future. So I wouldn't be so quick as to define Israel right now as an autocracy. And even in those situations, the state is a complicated mechanism, right? You're right that the research was also, a lot of it was in the States. In the United States, it's also much more complicated because of federalism, because you have 51 systems of governance and different legislatures, and the options of resisting are much broader. But even in more unitary countries like Israel, it's not that the state apparatus changes completely overnight, right? So just by way of numbers, the state apparatus in Israel right now is about between 500 and 700,000 employees, right? These are not people who you can replace overnight or in several weeks or several months. And so even if some of the measures that are contemplated will pass and we will be on our way toward a more autocratic regime, it doesn't mean that the space for resistance is zero. There's still ways that it can happen. Oh. So what, cynical about what?
When I said that we're already in that situation.
Oh, okay. Well, fine.
I think prospectively.
Well, prospectively, and there is the risk, and I think this, of course, this is the risk, and the risk is very present. But I think even if that risk materializes, I think resistance can still happen in many places. For example, this is one example, and this is also happens in the States, but it doesn't have to be in the States. More liberal municipalities, such as Tel Aviv, maybe, or other, can resist state policies, and so the space for resistance will not be zero.
So your question, Eli, which requires us to further consider what is law, what is the legally binding norm. And to the extent that there should be different kinds of law, in the sense that the domestic law trumps, but there could be some cases where international law, and that relates to what is manifestly or not manifestly, but there could be some, under the doctrine, could be some cases where even though the domestic law trumps, to the extent you disobey, there might be an excuse ex post. We don't have to take to look. We don't have time to fully analyze this. It goes beyond the question of the military. But technically speaking, domestic law trumps, period. So you can say whatever you want about international law. Israeli courts, technically speaking, will prefer domestic law. But there are two types of exemption. One is that jus cogens, which is part of Israeli law per se. So then it becomes an institutional question: who decides what is Israeli law, including international law? And therefore, ultimately, it is the courts. But in the other interesting exception, again, we don't have time to fully develop this, is the case of Feldman. So, very briefly, under Israeli law, if you were convicted, you have to ask the chairperson of the General Election Committee, if you were convicted of a certain crime, you have to ask for the chairperson of the General Election Committee whether there is whether this was with Kalon, which is actually it's just a legal technical term that says that you're disgrace, but this particular disgrace is that it means that you're unqualified to serve. And Feigl didn't ask, but whatever. But the question then was, the offense that he did was an ideological offense. he said the disengagement plan was patently unlawful and therefore he resisted. And there was a dispute between Justice Levy and Justice Zamir. Justice Zamir said, because he did it for ideological reason, is more dangerous because once you put it into the state apparatus, he may ideologically resist, and therefore, ipso facto, it means that it's disgrace in the sense that he's unqualified. Whereas Justice Levy said, no, because he did it for ideological reasons, that from his perspective go to the foundational aspect of the state, that should be a discount against disgrace. So this question is still open. I hope we don't get to that.
Saying we've already got there and that the legal system seems to be really beyond repair at the moment. I'm talking about the rhetoric of government, the accusation yesterday that the Attorney General is the main danger to the security of the State of Israel by a minister in our government. This seems to me bankruptcy in the Department of Justice is bankruptcy of the Israeli governmental system. Now, I do believe that resistance has a chance. So otherwise, I wouldn't even be talking here at all. Okay? But I think that even amongst us liberals, we don't realize to what an extreme of democratic bankruptcy we have already reached. He's not being dismissed, Amsalem, for saying that the Attorney General is the main danger to the security of the State of Israel, nor was the minister who said that Auschwitz made a mistake in not killing us all. Why only 6 million of us? I mean, these things coming from government are real bankruptcy of anything that can be called democratic governance. The fact that these people are staying in office, the fact that the Supreme Court, that the High Court of Justice has had lying on its desk for the last 2 or 3 months, the claim that a person who was found guilty of encouraging terrorism against Arabs should not be the Minister for National Security. And the High Court of Justice is not capable of making a decision on that, even though the Atirah, the petition, was limited to the role of the Minister of National Security, not to being a minister in the government at all. And yet the High Court of Justice seems to be unable or regards it as prudent not to make a decision on that. So I say that I think we in the liberal camp, when we're discussing these things as academics, are underestimating the full extent of the bankruptcy of our governance at the moment. That's all. But I don't think we've quite reached the state where there's no legality. I agree with you, Adam, that there are many people, and I know some of them who are still in office. The question is whether they'll be able to resist the tsunami of demonization of anything that can be called liberal.
Thank you very much for these strong words. I think they are very good concluding words for this session. Sorry, apologize to the philosophers who will reconstruct everything in the next session. 10 minutes coffee break. Adam invites everybody to a joint. Thank you very much.